The year is 1958. Air travel, once a luxury, is now accessible to the masses, but with it comes the fear of hijackings. This is the story of Avianca Flight 4, a hijacking intertwined with Colombia's political turmoil. Colombia, in the late 1950s, was a nation scarred by la violencia, a civil war that left deep wounds and rampant political violence. Rafael Farina Jiménez, a political activist, found himself disillusioned and desperate, believing escape was his only option. Farina meticulously planned the hijacking, choosing Avianca Flight 4 as his escape route. The date was set September 10, 1958. Farina moved like a ghost, securing a weapon and blending in with other passengers. The weight of his secret pressed down on him as the day of the hijacking dawned. The sun rose over Barranquilla, and at Ernesto Cortizos Airport, Avianca Flight 4 stood ready. Farina, detached and deliberate, prepared for his desperate act. The airport terminal buzzed with activity, a melting pot of Colombian society. Farina, on high alert, observed the scene, his mind racing with anticipation. As the crowd at Gate 4 swelled, Farina joined the queue, his heart pounding. Each face reminded him of the lives he was about to disrupt. The engines roared to life as Avianca Flight 4 prepared for takeoff. Farina, adrenaline surging, knew there was no turning back as the plane lifted into the sky. Section 2. A hijacker's resolve. The first 20 minutes of the flight passed in a blur of nervous energy and anticipation. Farina wrestled with his conscience, knowing the time for action was fast approaching. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the cold steel of the revolver. He had never intended to harm anyone, but he had to be prepared to use force if necessary. Taking a deep breath, he steeled himself for the confrontation to come. His plan was audacious, but it was his only hope of escaping the political turmoil. The landscape below seemed both familiar and alien, a world he was about to leave behind. But the moment arrived with a suddenness that made Farina's heart leap into his throat. The fastened seatbelt sign flickered off, and the pilot's voice, calm and reassuring, crackled over the intercom, announcing that they had reached their cruising altitude and would soon be starting their descent into Bogotá. It was now or never. With a surge of adrenaline, Farina rose from his seat, his movements swift and determined. He strode down the narrow aisle, his hand gripping the revolver concealed beneath his jacket. Passengers, startled by his sudden movement, looked up from their magazines and conversations, their eyes widening in surprise as he passed. He reached the cockpit door, a flimsy barrier separating him from the pilots and his ultimate goal. Without hesitation, he threw open the door, his entrance as unexpected as a bolt of lightning on a clear day. Inside, the two pilots, startled by the intrusion, turned in their seats, their faces etched with alarm as they registered the sight of the gun in Farina's trembling hand. "Take me to Havana!" Farina commanded, his voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Do it, or I'll kill everyone on this plane." The words hung in the air, heavy with menace, shattering the calm of the cockpit like a pane of glass breaking. The hijacking of Avianca Flight 4 had begun. The air inside the cockpit crackled with tension. Captain Diego Fonseca, a veteran pilot, stared down the barrel of Rafael Farina Jiménez's revolver. The gun, a menacing presence, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Fonseca maintained a calm demeanor, his voice steady. "We can't fly to Havana," he explained. "We don't have enough fuel. We're on a domestic flight." He hoped to de-escalate the situation. But Farina, wild-eyed, was in no mood for logic. "Don't lie to me," he snarled. "Change course now, or I'll start shooting." His words hung heavy in the air. The co-pilot, pale with fear, sat frozen. The fate of everyone on board rested on the captain's next move. Captain Fonseca knew he was facing an impossible choice. He couldn't risk flying to Cuba, the DC-4 simply didn't have the range. But he also couldn't risk directly challenging the hijacker. "All right," he said, his voice calm and controlled. "We'll change course to Havana, but we need to make a refueling stop first." He hoped that by appearing to comply, he might buy himself some time. Unbeknownst to Farina, Captain Fonseca had initiated a carefully coded distress call as he pretended to contact Havana air traffic control. The message, relayed through a series of seemingly routine communications, carried a chilling subtext. Avianca Flight 4 was being held hostage, and its fate hung precariously in the balance. Fonseca, his voice betraying no hint of the high-stakes game he was playing, continued to engage Farina in conversation, keeping him distracted while subtly guiding the DC-4 towards a small coastal town called Turbo. A town with an airstrip just long enough to accommodate a plane of their size. A town where hope, in the form of the Colombian military, was being mobilized with every passing minute. As the plane descended through the clouds, the lush green tapestry of the Colombian coastline unfurling beneath them, a glimmer of hope flickered in the eyes of the crew. They had managed to maintain their composure, to deceive the hijacker, to buy themselves precious time. Now, as they approached Turbo, they prayed that their gamble would pay off, that the authorities would be ready, that this nightmare would soon be over. In the cabin, the passengers remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in the cockpit, of the coded messages crackling through the radio waves, of the military forces converging on a remote airstrip on the Colombian coast. They were suspended in a state of limbo, their lives held hostage to the whims of a desperate man and the courage of a seasoned pilot who refused to give up hope. The wheels of the Douglas DC-4 kissed the tarmac at Turbo Airstrip, a sound both jarring and strangely reassuring. For the passengers of Avianca Flight 4, it signaled the end of a journey, but not the end of their ordeal. The air inside the cabin was thick with a mixture of relief and apprehension, a palpable tension that underscored the uncertainty of their situation. Captain Fonseca, his forehead beaded with sweat, his knuckles white as he gripped the control column, expertly guided the aircraft to a halt. His deception had worked. They had made it to Turbo without arousing Farina's suspicions. Now, as the engines whined to a stop, the silence inside the cockpit was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breaths. Through the cockpit window, Fonseca could see the flashing lights of military vehicles surrounding the plane. Armed soldiers, their faces grim, took up positions around the aircraft, their weapons trained on the DC-4's doors. The Colombian military, alerted by Fonseca's coded message, had responded swiftly and decisively, transforming the sleepy airstrip into a scene of tense anticipation. Inside the cabin, the passengers remained oblivious to the drama unfolding outside. Whispers rippled through the aircraft, a chorus of speculation and fear. The flight attendants, their faces pale but composed, moved through the aisles, their voices calm, as they instructed the passengers to remain seated and await further instructions. Section 2. Courage in the Face of Terror. Rafael Farina Jiménez, his nerves frayed by hours of tension, sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The plane had landed, but it wasn't the bustling tarmac of Havana that greeted him through the cockpit window. It was something far more ominous. A scene of military preparedness that shattered his illusions of escape. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "Where are we? This isn't Havana." His eyes darted around the cockpit, searching for an explanation, his hand tightening instinctively on the revolver. Captain Fonseca, his gaze steady, met Farina's gaze with a calm determination. "It's over, Farina," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We're in Turbo, Colombia. The authorities are here. Let the passengers go and let's end this peacefully." But Farina, backed into a corner, his dreams of freedom crumbling around him, was not ready to surrender. A surge of desperation, a primal instinct for survival washed over him. He swung around, his gun now pointed at the passengers, his finger trembling on the trigger. "Don't move!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the cabin, shattering the fragile peace. "If anyone tries anything, I'll shoot. I swear to God, I'll shoot." Section 3. Aftermath. The skies remember. What happened next unfolded in a blur of chaos and courage. As Farina, consumed by panic, threatened the terrified passengers, an extraordinary act of bravery erupted from the most unexpected of places. A group of passengers, ordinary men and women thrust into an extraordinary situation, found a reservoir of strength within themselves. They surged forward as one, their fear momentarily forgotten in a wave of collective defiance. A struggle ensued, a desperate tangle of limbs and shouts as they wrestled with the hijacker, their only weapons their bare hands and their unwavering determination to protect themselves and their fellow passengers. The sound of gunfire ripped through the cabin, a single deafening blast that sent shockwaves through the aircraft. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, as passengers and crew alike froze, their hearts pounding in their chests, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. But amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. Farina, overpowered by the courageous passengers, lay slumped on the floor, the gun clattering harmlessly away. He had been disarmed, subdued, his reign of terror brought to an abrupt and unexpected end. Moments later, the cabin door burst open, and armed soldiers stormed the aircraft, their movements swift and precise, their faces grim as they secured the scene. Rafael Farina Jiménez, his dreams of escape shattered, was taken into custody, his desperate gamble having ended in failure. Section 4. A new dawn for aviation security. The hijacking of Avianca Flight 4 sent shockwaves through Colombia and the international community. It was a stark reminder of the vulnerability of air travel in an era when security measures were still in their infancy. The incident became a catalyst for change, prompting airlines and governments around the world to rethink their approach to aviation security. New protocols were implemented, security checkpoints were established, and air travel, once a symbol of freedom and progress, became increasingly subject to scrutiny and control. The legacy of Avianca Flight 4 is a complex one. It is a story of fear and desperation, of courage and resilience, of the enduring human spirit that can triumph even in the darkest of times. It is a story that reminds us that even in the skies, where freedom once seemed limitless, there are boundaries, and that the choices we make, however desperate, have consequences that resonate far beyond our immediate grasp. Section 1. The seventh incident and beyond. The hijacking of Avianca Flight 4, the seventh such incident in recorded history, was a chilling prelude to the turbulent decades that would follow. It marked a turning point in aviation history, exposing the vulnerability of the skies to acts of terrorism and political violence. The world watched in horror as hijackings became increasingly common, their motives ranging from political demands to personal vendettas. Each incident chipped away at the sense of security that had once defined air travel. The skies, once a symbol of freedom and progress, had become a battleground, a stage for acts of desperation and terror. The response was swift and far-reaching. Airports transformed into fortresses, their once welcoming terminals now bristling with security checkpoints, metal detectors, and armed guards. Passengers, once able to board flights with minimal scrutiny, now found themselves subjected to rigorous searches and interrogations. The freedom of the skies had been curtailed, the price of security a heavy one. But amidst the heightened security measures and the ever-present reminders of past tragedies, the human spirit endures. We continue to fly, to embrace the wonder of air travel, our desire to connect, explore, and transcend boundaries undeterred by the shadows that linger in the skies. The legacy of Avianca Flight 4 and the countless other incidents that followed is a sobering reminder of the fragility of peace, the ever-present threat of violence, and the unwavering courage it takes to confront fear and embrace the unknown.